Happy Friday, everyone! This week's book for First Chapter Friday is The Silver Arrow by Lev Grossman. And as you can tell from the cover here, this is a fantasy novel. It's a fantasy adventure novel, and it's fairly new, and it's published by Little Brown and Company. Chapter 1, Uncle Herbert is a bad person. Kate knew only two things about her Uncle Herbert. He was very rich and totally irresponsible. That was it. You'd think there would have been more. He was her uncle, after all. But the thing was, she'd never actually met Uncle Herbert. She'd never even seen a picture of him. He was her mother's brother, and her mother and Uncle Herbert didn't get along. Which was weird when you thought about it. I mean, Kate had a younger brother, Tom, and he was gross and horrible. But you couldn't imagine, not actually seeing him every once in a while. But apparently with grown-ups, that was a thing. Uncle Herbert never came to visit. He never called. Where did he live? What did he do all day? Kate imagined him doing weird rich people things, like traveling to remote islands and collecting rare and exotic pets. And, buying an entire gingerbread house and eating it all by himself. That's what she would have done. But it was all a big mystery. The only thing Kate's parents were clear on was that Uncle Herbert was lazy and that he had too much money and no sense of responsibility. It made Kate wonder how such a lazy, irresponsible person could have gotten his hands on all that money. But adults never explained contradictions like that. They only ever changed the subject. Which isn't to say that Kate's parents were bad parents. They really weren't. Parenting just never seemed to be right at the top of their priority list. They went to work early and came home late, and even when they were home, they were always staring at their phones and their computers and making serious worky faces. Unlike Uncle Herbert, they worked all the time and were extremely responsible, though they never seemed to have much money to show for it. Maybe that's why he annoyed them so much. Either way, they never seemed to have much time for Kate. Kate had plenty of time for Kate, though. Sometimes it seemed like too much. She rode her bike and played video games and did her homework and played with friends, and once in a while, she even played with Tom. She wasn't one of the kids in her class who had a special talent, like drawing or juggling 4 beanbags at once, or identifying rare mushrooms and telling the difference between the ones you could eat and the ones that would kill you, though she often wished she was. She read a lot. She had to be told, with tiresome frequency, to close her book during dinner. Her parents sent her to piano lessons and tennis lessons. They sent Tom to cello lessons and hapkido lessons. But some days, as she pounded away on the mahogany upright in the living room or punished the garage door with her forehands and backhands, Kate found herself feeling restless, impatient. What was the point? She was young enough that all she had to do was kid things, but she was also getting old enough that she wanted to do more than play games and pretend. She felt ready for something more exciting, more real, something that actually mattered. But there wasn't anything, just toys and games and tennis and piano. Life always seemed so interesting in books, but then when you had to actually live it, nothing all that interesting ever seemed to happen. And unlike in books, you couldn't skip ahead past the boring parts. That's probably why, on the night before her 11th birthday, Kate sat down and wrote her Uncle Herbert a letter. It went like this. Dear Uncle Herbert, you've never met me, but I'm your niece Kate, and since it is my birthday tomorrow and you are super rich, you think you could please send me a present? Warmly, Kate. Reading it over, she wasn't sure it was the greatest letter anybody had ever written, and she wasn't 100% sure that the word please was in the right place, but she thought it contained her personal truth, which her language arts teacher always said was the important thing. So she put it in the mailbox. Probably nobody would ever read it anyways, because she hadn't put an address on the envelope, because she didn't know where Uncle Herbert lived. She didn't even have a stamp for it, which made it all the more surprising when a present from Uncle Herbert arrived the very next morning. It was a train. Kate didn't especially want a train. It's not like she was into trains. That was more of a Tom thing. Kate was more about books and Legos and Vanimals, these cute little animals that drove vans, which everybody in her class was insane about and which she liked too for some reason that she couldn't really explain. But after all, she hadn't asked for anything specific, and she guessed that her uncle probably didn't have much experience with kids. So Kate tried to be philosophical about these things. What was really surprising, though, was how big it was. I mean, this thing was really big, like too big to send through the mail. It arrived at their house on a specially reinforced, double-wide flatbed truck with 28 wheels. Tom counted. It was giant and black and incredibly complicated. In fact, it didn't look like a toy at all. It looked like an actual real-life-sized steam train. That, Uncle Herbert explained, was because it was one. Uncle Herbert had come to deliver it personally, in banana yellow Tesla, so insanely sleek and tricked out it looked like one of Tom's Hot Wheels. He was fat, with thinning brown hair and a round, mild-mannered face. He looked like a history teacher, or somebody who might take tickets at an amusement park. He wore shiny blue leather shoes and a banana yellow suit that perfectly matched his car. Kate and Tom came running out to stare at the train. Kate had lots of straight brown hair cut to the length of her chin and a sharp little nose that gave her a slightly princessy look, though she wasn't especially princessy. Tom's hair was short and blonde and tufty, like a guinea pig that just woke up, but he had that same nose, which on him looked princely instead. She was so surprised she couldn't think of anything to say. "That's a really big train," was all she came up with. It would have to do. "It's not a whole train," Uncle Herbert said modestly, "just the engine, and a tender, that's the coal car behind it." "How much does it weigh?" Tom asked. 100 tons, Uncle Herbert said crisply. "What exactly?" Kate said. "Like, it literally weighs exactly 100 tons? "Well, no," Uncle Herbert said. "It weighs 102 tons. 102.36. You're right to be suspicious of overly round numbers." "I thought so," said Kate, who was. You really don't appreciate how incredibly colossal a steam locomotive is till one shows up parked on the street in front of your house. This one was about 15 feet high and 50 feet long. It had a headlight and a smokestack and a bell and a whole lot of pipes and pistons and rods and valve handles on it. The wheels alone were twice her height. Kate's father came outside the house too. In fact, most people on the street came out to look at the train. He put his hands on his hips. "Herbert," he said, "what in the blazes is this?" He didn't really say blazes, but you can't put the word he said in a book for children. "It's a train," Uncle Herbert said. "A steam train." "I can see that, but what's it doing here on a truck so very close to my house?" "It's a present for Kate. And Tom, I guess, if she wants to share." He turned to Kate and Tom. "Sharing is important." Uncle Herbert definitely didn't have much experience with kids. "Well, it's a nice gesture," Kate's father said, rubbing his chin. "But couldn't you have just sent her a toy?" "It is a toy." "Well, no, Herbert, it's not a toy. That's a real train." "I suppose," Uncle Herbert said, "but technically, if she's going to play with it, then sort of by definition, it is also a toy. If you think about it." Kate's father stopped and thought about it, which was a tactical error. What he probably should have done, Kate thought, was lose his temper and call the police. Her mother didn't have this problem. She came tearing out of the house yelling, "Herbert, you blazing blockhead! What in the blaze do you think you're doing? Get this thing out of here! Kids, get off the train!" She said this last part because while all this was going on, Kate and Tom had gotten up onto the flatbed truck and were starting to climb up the sides of the train. They couldn't stop themselves. With all the pipes and knobs and spokes and whatnot, it was like rock climbing. They reluctantly got off it and retreated to a safe distance, but Kate still couldn't stop looking at it. It was giant and black and complicated with lots of fiddly bits that obviously did interesting things, and a cozy little cab that you could sit in. It looked ominous and fascinating, like a sleeping dinosaur. The longer you looked at it, the more interesting it got. And it was real. It was almost like she'd been waiting for it, without knowing. She kind of loved it. Stenciled along the side of the tender, in small white capital letters, were the words, "The Silver Arrow." That was its name. They'd written it with long, thin arrow sticking through the letters. So that was the first chapter of The Silver Arrow by Lev Grossman. And what would you do if you asked for a present and a full-sized train showed up in front of your house? Where would you go in that train? The train's not even on a track. Can it even travel? You'll have to find out by picking up this book. Have a great week.